Welcome to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is one of your hosts, Russell Bruce, and today I've come to you with another special episode. Today we're going to delve into the genealogy and the family history of none other than my favorite actor, Mr. Denzel Washington. All right. And one of the reasons I felt that this was important is unless you've been sleeping under a rock as a so-called African American, you hear a lot of conversations about the origins of our people, whether or not we came from Africa, whether or not we were always here in the Americas as indigenous people. And one of the things that people are not talking too much about are these Black European bloodlines. And I'm going to dig into that because when I did my genealogy, not only did I see that, most of the legs of my genealogy showing that, my people were already here in the Southeast, like the Georgias and the Alabamas in Tennessee. And, my Bruce bloodline coming from Virginia. And Virginia, I can never look at the same because it's an extremely interesting place. It was the first state that was established in the 13 colonies. It was almost like a nation to itself, and the history is just incredibly rich. So, once again, I'd not request, but I would just suggest that if you don't know who your great great grandparents are, or even your grandparents, go talk to your relatives, start digging through these records, find out who you are, get the true history of who you are. We were sold a bill of goods through the school systems here in the United States, and they led us all to believe that we all just descended from slaves, come from Africa, when indeed we have an extremely rich history here in America and abroad that would probably just blow you away once you start digging into the records. So let's jump right into this. And once again, today we're going to be talking about Mr. Denzel Washington. And Denzel was born in 1954 in Mount Vernon, New York. And he was born to the parents of Mr. Denzel Washington Sr. And his mother was Lennis, or she was referred to as Lynn Lowe, which was her maiden name. And she was from Georgia. But today we're going to place emphasis on his surname, Washington, and where it actually derives. So stick here to the end. I think you're going to find a lot of pleasant surprises, have you looking at history totally different. They always say, like, if you took a group of people and you took a picture, remember those old Polaroid cameras that we used to take, the Instamatics back in the day, kind of dating myself here, but you take the picture, you'd shake it, and you wait several minutes for it to develop, and you pass it around to everybody that was in the picture, right? Or just people that are standing around. The first thing people do is tend to look for themselves in the picture. They'll look at everybody else, but they're going to look for themselves because that's where the attachment is, right? And that's where the importance or focus is. So when it comes to history, as young children in school, if all you hear is stories of all these great white people in this white European resume and here in the United States, and you never see yourself, it really does not attach to you deep down in your soul unless you just totally just get lost and think you're somebody other than yourself. But today, with the internet and now with AI, it makes it so easy to go out there and find a lot of these older books and information, and especially genealogy, to dig up your family line to find out exactly who your people were, where did they come from, what did they do, what happened to them, what were their their joys, and what were their sorrows. So here we are again. Denzel Washington Sr., the father of Denzel, he was born in Buckingham County, Virginia. So you'll see a lot of these states and counties were named after people, right? And once again, Virginia is very, very great history. So Mr. Denzel Washington, let's take a look at some of the files in here. So when you're doing genealogy, you pull up a lot of census. So uh, 2020, you probably had people knocking on your door wanting to take census. This is one of the reasons why they do it. You could dig up some of these records in the future, or your descendants will be able to dig up and read about you, right? So Mr. Washington was born in 1909. So 1910, he would have probably been, a toddler, 1 years old, somewhere around there. So it shows here 0 years of age, Black male. And here you'll see his father, Washington, his mother, Virginia, most likely named after the state that she was born in, right? So let's see what was kind of going on here in 1910. One of the things I like to look for to see what their occupations were, what they were doing. And here, William Washington had a household, wife, Virginia, shows they were both born in Virginia. Both their mother and fathers were born in Virginia, English speaking. He was a farmer, general farmer. So most likely he was a landowner. When it shows farmer, most likely they were landowners. Otherwise, it would say stuff like laborers, like you see some of these other people up here. They were laborers and they were working on somebody else's farm. So by 1930, he would have probably been around 20. So here, 20 years of age. He's still single, not married at that point, still living with his parents. And it shows that he's a laborer. And 9 times out of 10, when you see that they're in the household with their parents and it's showing labor, they're working on their family farm. So here's Denzel, his father once again, William. Here's Denzel. Showing labor. So here it also says state highway. So he was also doing some labor outside of the farm. So it tells what industry he was in. All right. So Denzel Washington's father was William. So we see William Washington Jr., who was also born in Buckingham. His father, William Washington Sr., shows he was born in Westmoreland, Virginia. All these were in close proximity. All right, let's see what they have him doing here. Here he's listed as mulatto. And in previous podcasts, I may have mentioned there, like today, when you hear the term mulatto, most people think it means they're half black, half white as far as their parentage. Back then, it was more so geared around Indians mixed with foreigners, maybe black or white, European. Even in some case, it could be African. But to be honest with you, when you look at genealogy, less than 5% of the slaves came to North America. A lot of the migrations of Africans came post-slavery into North America. Now you'll see a lot more in, say, Brazil, and maybe into the islands like Haiti or even Jamaica. But for the most part, it were Europeans that were coming into these colonies. And this podcast is going to show that as well. All right. So it shows here William Washington, born 1850. So 1880 census here shows William listed as a farmer. So it shows that his family had land. So this land was being passed down, obviously. But when Denzel's born, he's born in New York. So there was a migration. His mom and dad split up early, uh, and he's shown living in New York with his mother. But William here is listed as a farmer in 1880. And this is going to get real interesting here. All right. So William Washington's father was John Washington, and he was born in Prince William County, Virginia. So normally you hear a lot of people say that they hit this proverbial wall when they get back around 1870-ish or back during the time of the Civil War. Seems like every state had this mysterious fire where all the census records got burnt up, and most so-called Black or African American people in this country, their records tend to die out there unless it shows them as a slave on somebody's plantation, etc. Every now and then you'll find something, right? So it shows here John Washington shows up on a plantation or in a household with someone that goes by BC Washington, and you're going to see in a second who BC Washington is. But in 1870, let's see, this is post-slavery, post-Civil War. Shows John Washington listed as mulatto. And this is interesting because I've had relatives, it seemed like every 10 years they would change their race. My great great grandfather, Andrew Bruce, it showed him listed 1 year as black, 1 year as mulatto, one as white, and then back to black. So a lot of that was they did not allow them to claim the indigenous status. So mulatto was another term that they could put on them and tax them because Indians weren't taxed, especially the ones that went to reservations, et cetera. So John Washington, all right. So we're looking here. He's on a plantation of BC Washington. We're going to find out who BC Washington is. This is a mispronunciation of his name. That says Bush Hood. But when we come here, let's go back to 1870. Yeah. Let's find the record that shows his father and his mother. It's a death certificate of one of his children. Also a child. All right, let's see what we have here. Trying to find the one that actually lists to show you who his father is. I show it on the tree, just trying to attach a record to it. But here we go right here. His father is Bushrod Washington, and you'll find out in a minute why this is important. And we could search other records to see. So I could click this here where I have some more records. Bushrod Washington, all right, is actually a nephew of President George Washington. So you'll see here, Bushrod's father is Corbin. His father is John. So John is the brother of George Washington. So Bushrod would be a grand nephew of President George Washington. John's father, of course, will be Lawrence Augustine Washington. So this is the father of George Washington. And you could see that Denzel Washington has a direct blood tie into this Washington family. So here, let me search one more thing just so that you guys can see this so you don't think I just made this up. So John Washington, who was born in 1812. Yeah, Prince William County. And like to say, I've seen it on WikiTree. So let's take a look at WikiTree. They keep good records as well. So that's not him there. Washington genealogy. John Washington. So this is John Augustine Washington, who is also that same bloodline. How come I can't find this? We're going to come back to this one, but let's jump right into Brother Corey Mayo. He did a couple of good builds on George Washington and tell you a little bit more about this Washington bloodline. And we're going to come back to John Washington and make this connection.
So it says here George Washington was the founding father of the United States, right? We know the story, right? But he was a slave owner who became uneasy with the institution of slavery, it says here, right? But provided with the emancipation of his slaves only after death. So he didn't care. He only freed, I think, only one of them after when he died. Just want to show you something. So I Googled George Washington slave owner, as you can see here. And these are the images I get. So let me just show you one real quick. All right, so you see this? Oh yeah, he had Negro slaves, right? This is the picture they always want to paint to us, right? A white man and a black man as a slave. White man master, black man as a slave, all right? Got Dodge the Hijack. Here's another one right here. Zoom into this one. As you can see, again, they try to show a white master and a bunch of colored people as servants and slaves. So they show us a lot of portraits and drawings of George Washington, right? This is one of them. Right, so in this portrait, there's like a Moor right behind him, as you can see. Some say that's William Lee, his servant, but we don't know. Is that really George Washington right here? Or who's George Washington? Or that his advisor? There's some say this is his Moroccan advisor. That's what, they say, that this is his Moroccan advisor, actually. We're in the book, it says here, George Washington, a biography by Douglas Salk Hall Freeman, Volume 2. This is from 1948, page 239 of this book, searched by the colonel, and the immersion was to no purpose. The man had disappeared. Loudon had then to attempt to identify Pierre Fidel on the basis of Benwar's description, added to what the traitor had said casually in his letter of himself and of his military position. What tall, dark officer was there in America? 38 years of age, unmarried, who had eyed the camp and was going to participate in the expedition against Fort Duquesne. The only officer who was known to Lord Loudon's informants as in any way answering to this description was Colonel Washington, George Washington, who was what tall, dark officer? Tall and dark. Washington. He was single. He had an aide. He was to share in the next march to the Ohio. As it changed, Lord Loudon had close at hand Captain David Kennedy, who had seen Washington in New York in March 1756, when the colonel was returning from the visit to General Shirley in Boston. Loudon consequently asked Kennedy for a description of the Virginian. All right, they're talking about George Washington. Washington said the captain was a man about 6 feet of a black complexion, again, a black complexion with black hair, which he then wore in a bag. Looks like a foreigner, a strong man. Kennedy remembered Washington's companions, Mercer and Stewart, and recalled that Washington's uniform was blue faced with red and lace, right? Black complexion, so-called black complexions, right? So when they mean dark, they do mean black, so-called black, dark complexion, so-called Negro, right? Remember, he is a descendant of a Huguenot. He does have Moorish blood, so this makes sense, right? Just want to show you guys again. I'm going to start with Nicholas Marteau, the Huguenot, right? Nicholas Marteau, the Huguenot, says passenger and immigration list, 1500s, 1900s. Nicholas Marteau, a primary immigrant, arrival place, Virginia, 1620. Wow, 1620, right? What are they doing? It says here, the trail of the Huguenots in Europe. The Huguenots in Europe. So George Washington's Moorish ancestor, Huguenot ancestor, and we go down through his daughter Elizabeth Marteau, who married George Reed, and they together had Mildred Reed, who married Colonel Warner Jr. The Warners and the Reeds got together, and they had Mildred Warner together, who married Lawrence Washington, who's coming from John Washington and Anne Pope. John was the first one, remember? And then we got Lawrence and their family coming out of England, as it says here, the Sobreve Manor. That's where their old Wessington house was. So then Lawrence Washington and Mildred Warner, they had Augustine Washington, who got with Mary Ball, and together they had President George Washington, and he married Martha Danbridge. Now we're going to get a description of Martha Danbridge. You guys are going to see what she was physically described as. I'm going to show you that she was also a dark complexion. So on his mom's side, Mary Ball. Her dad, Colonel Joseph Mataos Ball, George Washington's grandfather, and Mary Bennett. Remember the Bennett name? That's a Sephardic Jewish name. Sephardic Jewish name. So now we know through his mom's side, he does have also Sephardic Jewish Moorish blood. All right, continuing with George Washington again. So we got, he has Moorish blood. We know the Welsh, the English, a lot of the Scottish, the Anglo-Saxons. A lot of these people were Negro as well. So it's conjecture to say, he's white, half white or half Moorish, because, that side also is contested. He's already been described as black and dark already. We got his wife being called the Dark Lady. You guys starting to see the trend? It says here, History of the George Washington Bicentennial Celebration, Volume 1. This is from 1932. We're on page 225, Youth and Manhood of George Washington. It says here, the man himself, okay? Contemporaries of George Washington have commented that none of his portraits accurately resembled him. They don't resemble him. And a member of his immediate family is quoted as having said that picture of him painted by various artists all look very much alike, but are not really like the general himself. Do you see what they're telling you here? Who is that painting of? These body snatchers, whitewashed images. This is attributed to the fact that the expression of George Washington's face varied according to circumstances and the painter's side only in repose, right? So it's not him. His family members and all the people contemporary to his time are not describing him like that. A great similarity exists also in the word pictures penned by those who met George Washington at different periods of his life and under varying circumstances. One of the earliest of these depicts a handsome youth of 19, full height of 6 feet 2 inches, slender, blue eyes, an abundance of brown hair, and a clear, ruddy complexion. That does not mean white, so-called pale skin, or white man. That's the dodge to hijack. Ruddy, copper brown, reddish brown, copper, ruddy complexion. His manner, self-control, his speech well considered. Okay, he's ruddy. All those paintings of him are not him. They are not really like him. They don't resemble him. And we're in the book here, George Washington, a biography. And this is by John R. Alden. And I'm on page 11 of this book. So they're going to describe George Washington in this book here says he had property, he had prospects, and he was physically attractive, 6 feet tall. He was lanky, like many other Americans, like Jefferson and Lincoln. All right, just like Lincoln. Remember what Lincoln looked like? All right. He had rather long and lean arms and thighs, and he was flat chested. He had strong but quite regular features, except that the upper part of his nose was unusually broad. All right, unusually broad nose. His face, like so many countenances of his time, exhibited the marks of smallpox. He had light blue eyes, all right, light blue eyes, and brown hair, and was a vigorous male, a British officer who met Washington some years later reported that he had a dark complexion and a foreign look, a dark complexion and a foreign look. That's George Washington, okay? So break the spell, you guys see? All right, he has Moorish blood. He's being described as being a so-called dark-skinned complexion man, and by his contemporaries, primary sources, as it says here, dark complexion man, so swarthy. Can I get so swarthy George Washington from the Washington? So again, we got the.
All right, we're gonna stop that right there for now. So that's Curry Mayo, and here, let me show you guys where you can find this guy at. He has amazing content on his site, Curry Mayo, aha. So he uses an Indian name, and he actually has different playlists on there, and he has a genealogy playlist where he's taken a lot of stars and done their genealogy, um, on top of a lot of other things. He does a lot of content showing that the indigenous Americans were Negroes, and also connecting the dots with, like the Sephardic Jews coming out of Europe, as well as the Huguenots. So, and that's what he was doing there in this case. So he was showing there in some of the writings of some of these older books, before racism became such a thing here in the United States. This whole black white social construct is sickened a lot of people, especially when it comes to history and trying to figure out, who's who in history. Because when these people were coming into America, they were coming in all shapes, sizes, and colors. So whether they were black, white, biracial, what have you, they came in talking about their nationality, whether they were Irish, Scottish, uh, Polish, whatever they were. It wasn't all this, I'm black, I'm white. The same way today, like if we were to travel outside United States and they ask, where you're from, you're not going to say I'm from black. You're going to say that you're from America. You're an American, right? And the thing is, when most so-called black people or African American is we're status with today, right? But you really start digging deep, we're indigenous Americans, right? We're American. We've been here. Our bloodlines show that, right? But we do have mixture of other blood, whether some of it came from European bloodlines or even some coming from Africa. It is, we are who we are, right? But here's a book right here that I like to refer to, and you could actually find this one in PDF form for free online. And it's Memoirs of the Secret Services of John Mackey. So here's a guy. Let me see if I can blow this up so you guys can see it. So John Mackey, during the reign of King William and Queen Anne and King George I. All right. So it says here, the true secret history of the rise and promotions of the English and Scot nobility officers, Civil War. So what he's doing here is he's spying on the nobles. Like you could look right here once again, the nobles of the English and Scots, Scot nobility, officers, civil, military, naval, and other persons of distinction. So the language back then, up until 1780, in a lot of cases, you'll see, or in most cases, it was they were using like a F without the crossbar to signify a long S. So like if it had a sound like here, persons, distinction, you'll see that because in some cases you will see a S like in Sophia. But if it's a long S, they have it looks almost like an F. So you have to really look at this, right? So from the revolution, so persons of distinction from the revolution. So there was a revolution over there where they were removing the royal bloodlines from power. So that would have been King James Stuart bloodline. King James, once again, we keep referring back to King James, very pivotal person in US history and the history of the UK, right? Because it was King James. He was King James the Sixth of Scotland, King James First of England, and he united the crown. So he was king at the same time. It wasn't two different people. It was the same person. He united the crown and became the king of the United Kingdom. All right. And he also came here to set up the first charter, which was Virginia of the 13 colonies. And that was the London Company of Virginia, or the Virginia Company of London. I might be saying that backwards. So, and that was like in like 1604ish, somewhere around that time, 1608. But we'll look at that shortly. I think on the last podcast I actually pulled that up. So once again, in this book, and it gets real interesting, folks. So stick with me. So here, let me go down just a little bit. So you can see right here, Roman numerals. This book was printed in 1733. So if you cut and paste that and do the Roman numerals, this book was written in 1733. And I'm just Googling in here because it's describing these people of nobility. So you're talking about, barons, you're talking about, gosh, you name it. Here, let's just jump right in it. So it talks about he's of middle stature and well shaped. So who are they talking about here? Let's go up a little bit. So it says designs of King William's ministry, blah, 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 yet French king. So the Duke of Anjou to Spain. He came over in the service of the country, the president. There's some of these other ones are more defined as to who they're talking about. I don't want to guess at it. So here they're stating that this person is of middle stature, well shaped, very black complexion, a love of music and poetry, good judgment, and so forth. So once again, he's spying on the nobles because what they were trying to do when the King James Stuart bloodline was removed from the throne, they were trying to put them back, right? They were dethroned. And so there was this revolution in Europe, and a lot of it was tied around uh, the Roman Catholic religion going up against these other Protestants that consisted of like Jews and Muslims. Some of them were posing as Christians, but in private they were still practicing their other religions. And this went on for years there in Europe, and they were warned, but it got pretty serious during this particular period. So let's go down here because this is the part that I see a lot of people online debating. This right here will kill all the noise on that. Let's go down to where it starts talking about King James, his sons, and his grandchildren. All right, so right here, George Fitzroy, Duke of Northumberland. He's the son of King Charles II. So remember, King James the First of England, who was also King James the Sixth of Scotland, right? He had a son named King Charles, who was King Charles the First, and King Charles the First's second son was King Charles II. So along with King James, they are the ones who came to the United States to set up the 13 colonies. All right. And they brought a lot of these noble families along with them when they were being ousted, right? So King Charles II is the one who set up the Carolinas, New York, New Jersey. So when you see cities like Charleston, North Carolina, they're named after King Charles the First and the Second. All right, also in Virginia. So you see here that once again, George Fitzroy is the son of King Charles II, the Duchess of Cleveland, by the Duchess of Cleveland, was one of the captains of King James's horse guards, which he quitted at the Revolution. So I guess that means that's what he was doing during the Revolution, and never had any posts, though sometimes presents from the king, all King William's reign. On the Queen's ascension, it's hard to follow when you see these right here. On the Queen's ascension, or on the Queen's accession to the throne, it says made constable of Windsor Castle, blah 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 blah. But anyway, let's go down to the description because it's hard to really read and follow that the way it is. So it says he's a man of honor. So once again, we're talking about the son of King James II. He's a man of honor, nice in paying his debts, living well with his neighbors in the country, does not much care for the conversation of men of quality or business. Is a tall black man. Once again, he's a tall black man like his father, the king. So they're saying that King James' son, George Fitzroy, is tall and black like his father, King Charles II, and he's about 40 years old. All right. So once again, King Charles II was also referred to by his mother as the black boy. And the thing is, you'll hear people say, oh, he was black because his eyes were black and his hair was black. No, they're talking about his complexion. They're not saying he's tall with black hair. I'm talking about they could have easily said that. He said he's a tall black man. And you'll see a lot of times some of these other people, like right here. All right. So Charles, Duke of St. Albans, is the son of King Charles II. So here's another son by Miss Gwynn. So these dudes was just pumping out children. And some legitimate, some illegitimate. All right. And he was made by King William on the bedchamber. And I read that it sounds like they were up to some other stuff, but it's just that he was part of their political cabinet, right? Or part of their royal throne, supporting it. And captain of the band of pensioners. I guess that's pensioners, band of pensioners, and the fan of French, congratulate marriage, blah, blah, blah. So it comes down here to describe like his personality and all that good stuff, right? He's a gentleman in every way, day born natural. So I guess they're saying he's a natural gentleman, well bred. He doesn't love business. His other brother, his half brother, didn't either, right? He doesn't love business, is well affected to the constitution of the country. He is of a black complexion. They ain't talking about his hair. You're saying he is a black complexion, not so tall as the Duke of Northumberland, yet very like King Charles when he turned 30 years old. So they're telling you right here that these are black folks right here, right? And when we start talking about King James being black, people want to get all upset, thinking people are hijacking. This is a picture of King James that's actually in the books that he actually authored. Like you can go to like Amazon right now. There's a couple books. One is the one he wrote on demons. You know, he felt that people were trying to attack him with demons and all this other stuff, witchcraft. So he wrote a book on demonology, you know, like proving that it existed, that people were actually using it, right? So on that book, he actually uses these pictures. So you could see he looks just like anybody else's uncle here, you know, he looks like a black man. And here, down here is actually his father, a picture of his father, Lord Donnelly. All right. The crazy thing is they show up on my family tree, the King James bloodline through his mother's side. So I'll have to do that on another day for the sake of time. But, you know, a lot of times people they want to believe that these were like white pilgrims and so forth coming in here. Like early on in the 16, 1700s, you've seen a lot of these black nobles. So you have something called black nobility, where you had these black noble bloodlines that ruled Europe, right? So don't forget, you know, the Moors ruled Spain in Europe, or to say the Iberian Peninsula. Spain is a newer name, and they were all throughout Europe, you know. And then when the Roman Catholics finally overthrew them in 1492, Isabel and Ferdinand get together and send Columbus out to discover so-called new territories that weren't so new. They knew exactly what was out there. Um, you know, you have a situation where a lot of these Iberians fled into France, and that's where that Huguenot bloodline, where that Washington bloodline. So when they say that George Washington has a bloodline that's coming out of France, they were descendant of these ancient Moors. All right. So let's get back to here. So I think there's another member of this family, Nathan Lord Keeper. So you'll go through here now. There's some that they mention that are pale or even fair, right? And fair could mean one or two things, right? It could mean either a lighter skinned black person, biracial, or it can mean white, but they'll say pale if they're white. But you'll see that the majority of these dukes and earls and so forth, they were black. And a lot of these people ended up in America. So when you look at like the transportation for the Jacobites during the Jacobite rebellion that were being ousted out of Scotland, you'll see, like I even see Bruce's that were on these ships. You'll see a lot of Stuarts because that was this Stuart bloodline. King James' last name was Stuart. So his sons, King Charles, these were Stuarts. So a lot of you out there with the Stuart last name, these people were ousted out of Europe. And most of them, when they were conquered during the Jacobite Rebellion, ended up in Liverpool because that's where the war was taking place. And a lot were killed. And after a while, they were just ousted. Like instead of keeping them there in prison, you know, they sent them into the 13 colonies. So you'll see a lot of them coming into the Carolinas and into Virginia. So if your last name's Stewart, you're a descendant of these bloodlines, most likely. And a lot of them went into like Barbados and Jamaica. That's why you see a lot of Scottish names down in Barbados and Jamaica. Now we're being told that we came from Africa and we were enslaved and we took on the names of the slave masters. Well, if you study the history of slavery, it started off with the Spanish and the Portuguese and the French. So when you're saying that, you know, these names came from them, when you do your genealogy, if you have, especially if you have a Scottish name, you're not going to see that they got their name from a Scottish slave master. It just didn't happen like that. These people came with these names and they came from Europe. It did not come from Africa. There's ships, there's ship manifests, you know, you could look at the immigration. Another thing I like to do is if you go to like the origin of the surnames, you'll see that they'll even have like family crest. And they'll show you the early migration, like some of the names of the people who were coming in 16, 1700s. So when you're doing your genealogy, that's a good place to check. Don't assume that these people are all white. And that's what people have done for years because history in this country has been whitewashed. So here's another thing going back to George Washington, right? So when we look at George Washington and this Washington bloodline, one of the things that people don't talk much about is this particular name, Washington, right? And I know a lot of people in the United States with this name. I have a lot of friends with this last name. So check this out. According to the data from the 2000 census, approximately 90% with the surname Washington are African American, whatever you want to call us. We'll go with African American for now for commonality. This means that the vast majority of the people with the last name Washington are Black. So if 90% of the people have this name, how did they all end up with this name? Like, did they all get them from slave masters? A lot of them want to say, well, George Washington had all these slaves. We'll go back to Corey Mayo here in a minute because they showed that the majority of the people that were on his plantation came from Europe. They weren't African slaves. They were these Europeans who were being ousted and sent into servitude. So they came in as indentured servants. So, um, so if you have this last name, I'm talking about, I'm not sure if you knew this history, but this is what considered the blackest name here. George Washington, I don't think he even had children. Like his brothers did, and his grandfather, his father, they had tons of children. And a lot of the white Europeans who were coming in, they didn't even live that long. So I would like to look into the genealogy of some of these white people who are claiming these bloodlines to take a look to see what was going on. Because like when we look at ours, we're told that, hey, these slaves, they work so hard and, you know, they were dying off at 20 something. Women couldn't have children because they were working too hard in the field and they were dying. I don't see that. When I look, I see that they were living long lives. I see a lot of centenarians. I see family. The average size of the family was about 10 people. Some cases they had 15. Some of these guys had multiple wives and had 20, 25 children. So history, the way that it's being told is not correct. So one way to dispel the myth, study the history of you. What's your history? Look in here and find out what your genealogy is. How long did your people live? Like, did their name get changed? You know, did they, once they were free, change their name? You're not going to see any of those stories. It's all fictitious.
Washington line here going all the way down to George, right, and Martha, right here, as it says here with the X. This is his family line. His dad, Augustine, and his mom, married Ball. So this is one line, and again, his mom's line, the Ball family, as we can see here. Crest of Joseph Ball, Washington's grandfather, William Ball, Lord of Manor of Barkham. This goes all the way back to 1480. All right, Robert Ball, William Ball, and then goes all the way down to Mary Ball right here, mother of Washington. So I'm at this website, nps.gov, is a government website.
Hold on one second. Let me blow this up so you
Says
guys can see.
Here, National Park Services, says George Washington, birthplace, says the Washingtons in Virginia history. We're going to talk about the planter John Washington, right? So he was actually coming from England over there, and he decided to stay. He was like a merchant, a ship merchant, all right? And he decided to stay. He actually went to court, because he had to deal with somebody else to go back, and he didn't go back. So he won, and he married the guy who helped him win, his Pope, Nathaniel Pope. And this story says John Washington married Anne Pope, Colonel Pope's daughter, in 1658, and was given 700 acres of land on Mattox Creek, Colonial Beach, as a wedding gift. The land grew tobacco to use as money or sell. Tobacco was the cash crop on the plantation. Cattle, hogs, sheep, fowl, vegetables, crops such as corn were raised for food. The work on plantation required manpower, people for raising crops and caring for the livestock. Tobacco needed most manpower. It took one person to work 2 acres of tobacco. People were brought to Virginia from England, where their passage on ship paid by planters. The people brought over would have to work for 4 to 7 years for the planters and receive the freedom dues, a bushel of corn and suit of clothes. They were called indentured servants and were a cheap source of labor. All right, we're not talking about Africans. All right, the planters that paid the passage would receive 50 acres of land per servant or head, causing this to be known as the head right system. So they would get 50 acres for every servant they got. You see that? John Washington used the head right system for claiming land. This is your land, your ancestors' land, right? He paid the passage from England for 63 indentured servants brought to Virginia. Where he get his servants from, the Washington family, Europeans, not Africans. Indentured servants would never own any land in England. If they came to Virginia and worked for a planter for 4 to 7 years, the servants would buy their own land after their indenture. They had a benefit. It doesn't matter if they were convicts, they were whatever their situation was to get here as an indentured servant, they had the opportunity to also get your land. And possibly if they wanted to do their own indenture, their own head right grant or whatever. Land was plentiful and cheap. It was plentiful. They took it from the American indigenous people. It was plentiful and cheap. Come and get it. Come and get it. Land was the reason people came to Virginia. Land was needed to plant tobacco and make money. We got to make that money. We don't care if it's your resource. We don't care if it's the Great Spirit's land that it gave it to you. We don't care if it's your promised land. We need to make money. We got to plant tobacco. Again, so if they're telling us that the Washingtons, his grandfather had, the European servants, what's all these people? All right, let's go back. All right, they showed us a different image earlier, you see. So are these Europeans right here? Because again, history, we're going to read this book. It says George Washington and the American Revolution, Kim Collier. And it's here, chapter 1, John Washington and Bacon's Rebellion. And in this book, it tells us a little bit of the same thing, a little bit more details when I read it here. It says their wedding gift of 700 acres. Remember, Nathaniel Polk gave it to him as a wedding gift, his father-in-law, on the Mattox Creek from Nathaniel. John and Anne resided in Nathaniel's home until John built their own home on Mattox Creek. In 1659 and 1660, John purchased an additional 1,000 acres of Mattox Creek, while taking advantage of the head right system that for every indentured servant as a Virginia landowner receives 50 acres. All right, he took advantage. I remember this is George Washington's grandfather. All right, John Washington. He was an owner. All right, of all these acres. He took advantage of the head right system. He got 50 acres per every servant he got. This forms of bonded labor was done by contract, usually 3 to 7 years in exchange for transportation to America and necessities to workers. The main origin of people were white Germans, all right? White Germans, not Africans, but there were some black, English, and Scottish people, all right? So you're sure these are all white Germans, they weren't black Germans? Because remember what Benjamin Franklin told us, that all the Germans were swarty. So where do you get these white Germans in this time, 1600s? If Benjamin Franklin told us in the 1700s that the Germans were swarty and the Scottish. So only the English were, he said, according to them. But we know they weren't. They were also English. All right, so this is all conjecture right here. But letting you know, again, Europeans, not Africans, is the point. Some of these workers were really interested in getting into America, New World, and wanted to become established colonists. Ooh, you see some of these, like, yo, when I'm done with my term, I'm going to become an established colonist. I'm going to have my own farm and indentured servants. I'm going to be a master. Take these Indians' land, just move them aside. Some servants were taken from their homeland due to political or religious reasons, and some of the indentured servants were convicts, like I said, convicts. Then you can get your land. If after you do your time, all right, let's go over there. Convicts. All right, so now we're at the George Washington Mount Vernon official website is mountvernon.org. All right, they have a whole library and history of, they keep all the records and all the history of George Washington. And this article on their website is called Servants and Marriage. I wanted to read this to you. It says several hundred hired and indentured servants, primarily men, but a few women as well, worked for George Washington for more than 40 years at Mount Vernon. While most of these individuals chose to work at Mount Vernon, there were a few who came unwillingly as convicts. Convicts, remember we got in the last video all these convicts they were dumping over here. They were really cheap, right? All these convicts they were dumping over here in the colonies, indentured servants. Most were of European background, though others had African and Native American ancestry. Oh, though others are what? We already know, right? What we do with this word, we cross it out. We cross that out. Dodge the hijack. You got to show me. You got to prove to me that's an African. You mean a Negro, so-called? You mean a person of color? And who? Oh, Indians, yeah. But most were of European background. So most of his servants were of European background. The ones, right? Indentured servants. Do you understand? The history. They used to tell us, we used to always picture what? Look at this. This is what they always wanted us to picture.
Yeah, and keep in mind that a lot of times when you see these pictures, like the camera really wasn't introduced until like around 1830s. So anything prior to that, it was free game for people to just draw pictures. And you'll see in some cases, like they'll keep the picture consistent for the character. But the thing is, it's like when you go ahead and you dig into records, like he went into the autobiography of George Washington, in the descriptions in there, the firsthand accounts, they describe him of having dark skin and light blue eyes and brown hair. Same thing with Abraham Lincoln. They described him as being very dark. And, yeah, they'll show him with dark eyes, dark hair. But a lot of times, if you read deeper, a lot of times these were stage pictures or they had characters who sat in for pictures for different people. Like, and one of the reasons why I showed you this book here is because you could even take some of these names, right? Like, let's go back and look at, let's take this guy. All right. So, tall black man, Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Captain. This is what we deal with for U.S. history. So if I say, give me a picture of this guy, this is what they give you. Charles Fitzroy. Everything about his father, him, his grandfather, everything, like when you read through books that were written back then, firsthand accounts, they described them as black people. But during these Renaissance periods, they whitewashed everybody. And this is what you see. And then with Hollywood and Disney, they pretty much just wash your mind into this history. And, and black people have this spell cast on them of inferiority. And it's just as bad with white people because they believe that they're superior and that they did all this, And the thing is, it's stolen history. We don't have to hijack anybody's history. And people are going to say that and say we're culture vultures. Listen, let's be honest. American history or culture is black culture. We're at the root of most of the inventions that have taken place that help push this culture forward. Just Google black inventions. Then also look at the time period in which we were supposedly enslaved and held back and uneducated. We're creating all these magnificent things that are even used today around the world. Music and entertainment. It's like it's black. All the music here outside of heavy metal has its origins with our people. Uh, the food, you know, the black eyed peas, collard greens, the turkey. Like, look at what they say was being served up Thanksgiving Day, like the turkey and the stuffing and all that. Where do you think that stuff came from? We were the ones that were feeding these people when they came back. American indigenous culture is black culture. You know, every year they're adding new words to the dictionary based upon our slang. And when you go back and you look at Noah Webster, who created dictionary back in say 1820s, right? He states himself that he used about 26 different indigenous languages to create this language that we are speaking today, because it was more or less like a trade language, right? And most of these names, not only Washington, you see names like William, Smith, Johnson, Jackson. These names are indigenous here. And that's a story for another day, and we'll do a podcast on it. But we're not out to steal anybody's culture. But if you look at American culture, where would American culture be without us? And that's not trying to be cocky or anything else. That's just stating hardcore facts. So once again, when you look at stuff like this is and has been part of the problem, where you see these pictures, and like these guys right here that look like this, who the hell are they conquering? These guys don't even look masculine enough to conquer anybody. So if you really just put your thinking caps on, a lot of times they just whitewash pictures. Then even with the hair, you know, when you go back and you're looking at like King Charles and these black kings, they wore their hair like that, and we did too here in the 80s. Like when you look at people say like Rick James, like I even rocked a curl back in the day, right? So let's see, these hairstyles, you'll see we are very cyclical in our hairstyles, right? And even in the way we dress. So you look at most of these college and NFL football rosters, you'll see all these guys today rocking the dreads, right? But when you go back and you look at the Mayan culture, they were rocking the same dreads. So it's like things come and they go. And a lot of times it's just in the DNA. And it's like, and if you have the genetic makeup for it, it's just gonna come back out at some period of time. And it's coming back out now. So, but anyway, let's get ready to wrap this up. Let Curry Mail finish up what he was saying here. I think he's in the last minute of this bill here.
European servants he had, but they're always going to show you that history was told to us in a different way than it actually happened. And indentured servants were in Washington's plantation, and they were mostly European background. And what aboriginals, so-called Native Americans, so-called Africans, right? They call you African today. You're an American Indian.
All right. So that was Curry Mail's bill. And that was more so geared around George Washington, who was on his plantation and his family. I'm connecting the dots here with Denzel's family, John Washington, who was actually, now some people are going to probably say that he was a slave to Bushrod. He was definitely on his plantation. It shows that he was not married to the mother that they have listed there. So this is where a lot of the mystery will come in and have you guessing. But a lot of the things that you read, this particular John, all right, and if you look at the names, right, a lot of times the names just got passed down. So here's John Augustine Washington, who's the grandfather of Bushrod, right? And this John is actually the brother, once again, of George Washington. Here, let's do this. Show you something here before we close out. Here's the Washington bloodline. There's William. That's John Washington, who's the son of Corbin, Bushrock Corbin Washington. All right. And Corbin is the son of John. So here's John's siblings. George Washington. Here's President George Washington, and John is his brother. All right. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There's the story of Denzel Washington's bloodline and where it originated. What you don't see Africans getting off ships like they say, even though there are other lines here. So I'm not going to say that, all of them come back from some noble bloodline. I didn't finish all of them. But when you start to look at them, most of the time, if they're, say, in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, those areas, you'll see that either they migrated from the Virginias, Carolinas areas, and went there, or they were always there. Like my family in Georgia, it just looks like they were always there. And then, the records tend to die out because if you were taking somebody's land from them, you're not going to leave all the records showing them there all the way back into the 1100s or what have you. Here's a hijack. And here's another thing. It wasn't so much that we were getting names from these Europeans. These Europeans were coming in here with German, Polish, Russian names, things of that nature, and they were changing their names when they got here to match the indigenous names here on the land and placing themselves in these families, or they were marrying into these families. And that's how they were getting their hands on the land as well. But once again, this is just to inspire people to start digging into their family story. Like, what's your story? Don't just take a story that was handed down to you that's full of mystery and lies and deceit. Go out and find your family firsthand. Don't go around talking to people about what happened 6,000 years ago and what happened with the Anunnaki on other planets. Like I heard a guy saying he has 10 million years of history and he's going back trying to tell you what happened 10 million years ago, but you don't even know who your great grandparents are or where they lived and what they went through. Like, why did all these people get forced out of the South and end up in some of these northern cities into the projects? What happened? What's your story? All right. Once again, this is your host, Russell Bruce, and this is Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. Until next time, peace.